You know, North Korea, it's one of those places that feels like a total mystery, right? But here's the thing. If you really want to understand the country today, you have to go back to the beginning, back to the man who started it all, Kim Il-sung. In this explainer, we're going to pull apart the official story, the official myth, because once you peel back those layers, the logic of the entire nation starts to make a whole lot more sense. But first, we have to ask a pretty basic question.
So let's just start with this big question. For decades, we've heard North Korea's actions described as irrational, unpredictable, just plain bizarre. But what if the problem isn't their logic, but ours? What if we've been looking at the whole thing through the wrong lens, basically ignoring the very stories they tell themselves about who they are?
And this is where it gets really interesting. This quote from scholar B.R. Myers just nails it. The problem isn't that we don't have information, it's that we tend to just dismiss their official story, their propaganda, as, too ridiculous to take seriously. But that's a huge mistake, because what if the answer is hiding right there in plain sight? So here's the bottom line, the key takeaway from all this. To truly get why North Korea does what it does, we have to take its founding story seriously, not as historical fact, but as the software the entire country runs on. And that software, that story, is all about Kim Il-sung.
All right, so if we want to understand that operating system, we've got to start with the official version of events. This is the hero's tale that every single North Korean learns from the moment they're born. It's the foundational legend of a revolutionary who was supposedly destined to lead.
So, according to the state, the official history, Kim Il-sung was basically a military genius from day one. The story goes that when he was just 20 years old, he founded a uniquely Korean revolutionary army. And for more than a decade, he waged this relentless, independent guerrilla war from the mountains of Manchuria against the Japanese Empire. And in this telling, he, and he alone, is the one who liberates Korea. This isn't just a story, it's the absolute bedrock of the state's entire identity.
And this image, wow, it perfectly captures that official story. You see Kim right there, the strong guerrilla commander, surrounded by his loyal Korean soldiers. This is the kind of proof that's shown to the people, a self-reliant hero leading his own army against a giant enemy. But let's compare this image to what the actual historical record says.
Okay, so we've seen the legend. Now it's time to peel it back and look at the actual evidence, the documents, the records, everything that historians outside of North Korea have pieced together. And as you're about to see, the story it tells is very, very different.
This map, this changes everything. See, it wasn't a lone Korean army at all. It was actually a huge network of guerrilla forces, and the whole thing was organized and led by the Chinese Communist Party. It was called the Northeast Anti-Japanese United Army. And Kim Il-sung, he was part of it for sure, but he was a commander of a unit, not the supreme leader of the entire thing.
I mean, when you put them side by side like this, the contrast is just stark. The legend says he led a Korean army. The record shows he was a commander in a Chinese army. The legend says he fought independently. The record shows he was under Chinese command. The legend talks about constant victory. The historical record, well, it shows his unit was pretty much crushed by 1941. And the biggest one of all, the legend says he liberated Korea. The reality? He fled to the Soviet Union and came back years later with the victorious Soviet army.
So, his actual career path? It paints a completely different picture. Not some kind of messiah, but a tough, committed, but ultimately junior guerrilla fighter. He joined a communist youth group, he rose through the ranks of a Chinese-led army, and yeah, he had some successes. But in the end, his unit was defeated, and his return to Korea, it wasn't as a conquering hero, it was as a captain in the Soviet Red Army. His entire claim to power was propped up by foreign support.
And you can literally see the story in these two photos. It's just incredible. On the left, there's Kim Il-sung, the tough guerrilla in Manchuria, right before his forces were smashed. Then on the right, just a few years later, there he is in the Soviet Union, wearing a Soviet uniform. This isn't the story of an independent liberator. It's the story of a defeated commander who had to escape and get retrained by his powerful allies.
So that's the reality. Which leads to the big question, right? Why is there this massive, massive gap between what actually happened and the official story? Well, as we're about to see, this was no accident. It wasn't just a simple exaggeration. This was a deliberate, systematic process of forging a brand new founding myth.
So how do you build a legend like this? Well, it turns out there's a playbook. First, you take small, real successes, like a minor raid on a little town, and you blow them up into these huge, war-changing victories.
Second, you just erase the inconvenient facts. His Chinese commanders, his Soviet patrons, gone. Written right out of the history books. And then, get this, they literally backdated history. The founding of the North Korean army was moved from 1948 all the way back to 1932, just to create this fiction that Kim had started his own army from the very beginning.
And all of this, every single bit of it, serves one absolutely crucial purpose. It's a concept called historical legitimacy. Basically, every government needs a story to justify why it gets to be in charge. For North Korea, that story is that the Kim family, and only the Kim family, was pure enough and strong enough to save Korea from foreigners. By creating this story, their rule became more than just politics. It was presented as their destiny.
Okay, so we've got this fabricated history. But you might be thinking, that was a long time ago. Why does a story from the 1930s still matter so much today? Well, that's because this myth isn't just about the past. As we're about to see, it controls pretty much everything about North Korea's present and its future.
Let's go back to that software idea. This myth isn't just a bunch of posters or slogans. No. It is the core operating system of the entire country. Every major decision they make, from building nuclear weapons to shutting out the rest of the world, is processed through the logic of this foundational story.
And you can see the legacy of that myth in everything they do. It justifies their one family rule. I mean, if Kim Il-sung was this godlike hero, then his bloodline has to be special, right? It's the basis for their ideology of Juche, or radical self-reliance, because the legend says they won all by themselves. It fuels this constant narrative of struggle where the enemy just changes from Japan to the United States. And maybe most important of all, it explains why real change is almost impossible. If they admit the truth about the past, the whole foundation of their power just crumbles.
And if you need any more proof of how important this story is to them, just listen to this quote. During that horrific famine in the 1990s, when the country's entire economy and food system completely collapsed, the one thing that kept working was the machine that tells the myth. That tells you that for the regime, the story is literally more essential for survival than food.
So we end up right back where we started, but hopefully with a totally new way of looking at things. Because understanding this huge gap between the man and the myth isn't just some history lesson. It really is the key to decoding North Korea today. And it leaves us with one last really big question. If an entire nation's identity, its purpose, and its power are all built on a fictional past, what on earth does that mean for its future?